Around 4 p.m., Lindsay Googled the 3V restaurant in Plymouth, and she looked up the driving distance from her home to the restaurant. And this is important because prosecutors will later argue that Lindsay murdered the children with premeditation, making sure that Patrick would be out of the house long enough that she could complete the act without any interruption. But according to a lawsuit, and this is straight from Lindsay's lawsuit, quote, "As soon as Patrick left to pick up the food, there was a loud, demanding, repetitious voice. 'This is your last chance. You have to kill the kids so you can kill yourself.'"
Nobody is arguing that Lindsay didn't kill her children. Question is whether she was experiencing a psychiatric crisis so severe that she couldn't understand or control what she was doing, or whether prosecutors can prove that she planned it. That is what this trial will determine. I think the public debate is missing one of the most important contradictions in Lindsay's case. Because Lindsay was not a woman who didn't have access to care. She was already in the mental health system. So how does a woman that's being seen by that many professionals become invincible in the one way that matters? No one contained the danger?
Defense team will later say that Lindsay was struggling with bipolar disorder and severe postpartum depression, maybe even the rare postpartum psychosis. She'd even been seen by some of the top mental health experts in the country with thoughts of self-harm. Her stay there happened in the weeks before the murders, but her mental health treatment started way before that. According to court docs, Lindsay had been on a regimen of up to 13 different psychotropic meds, both to monitor her mood and her sleep. Her husband, Patrick, would later file a lawsuit against doctors, claiming this large amount of drugs actually hurt her more than it helped.
To me, this is where Lindsay becomes more than the woman, the defendant sitting in a wheelchair. Lindsay was a patient and a mother and a person trying to understand why her mind was changing. As someone who struggled with mental health, I know that appearing functional is not the same as being safe. You can answer questions, smile for pictures, show up for appointments, and still be drowning privately. I'm not saying this history proves psychosis, and I'm not holding every provider legally responsible. I am saying the warning signs were serious enough to lead to hospitalizations and repeated changes to treatment.
And in fact, altered her mental state. So Patrick had been so worried about Lindsay, her concerning journal entries, he hardly left her home alone. Either he would stay with her and the kids, or a family member would actually come and do the same. But that's not what happened the day of the murders, January 24th, 2023. That morning, the Clancy's oldest daughter, Cora, was having some stomach issues, so Lindsay took her to the doctor for an appointment. When she got back, Lindsay and the kids played outside in the snow, even building a snowman.
Prosecutors argued that her actions that afternoon proved that she planned this. Defense is saying that someone can appear normal on the outside and still be in the middle of a psychiatric crisis. That's one of the biggest questions this jury will have to answer.
Based on all of the facts that have come out. But what's interesting to me about this case too is so many people have almost come to Lindsay Clancy's defense, saying, this is a psychosis situation. She had a mental break. What do you make of all of that?
I mean, I think that's going to be the entire crux of her case. As soon as the details of this situation came out, including the fact that Lindsay Clancy allegedly attempted to take her own life in the same sort of episode, the whole conversation was around postpartum psychosis. And I think that's what a lot of people either assumed or were told had happened. And so I think that's going to end up being the crux of the case. And certainly for Lindsay Clancy's defense team, that's what they're going to want the jury to be focusing on rather than what actually happened.
I have seen people online treat compassion for Lindsay as a form of disrespect for Cora, Callan, and Dawson. I don't accept that. Those 3 children are irreplaceable victims, and their father is living with a loss that most people couldn't even imagine. And I can still believe that their mother was a victim of a severe illness and a fragmented system of care. Empathy does not erase the act. It changes the question from what kind of monster did this to, what was happening in this person's mind And was there anybody there who saw the danger, who could have intervened?
Yeah, what you exactly just said is going to be what her defense attempts to prove. Lindsay Clancy is not denying what happened, she's denying why it happened. And that's a complicated and nuanced state of psychosis. And what they really will need to prove is just that Lindsay Clancy didn't have the mindset, what's called the mens rea, the criminal intent to do what she did. She didn't, according to her defense, desire to kill her 3 children. They're going to have to prove that that mental capacity was lacking at the time that the crime occurred, which is going to be really complicated.
Massachusetts law is more specific than just asking whether Lindsay was ill. Once criminal responsibility is raised, the Commonwealth must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she retained substantial capacity to appreciate the criminality and the wrongfulness of her conduct, to conform her conduct to the law. This is why the route search, the timing, and her actions before and after all matter. Those actions may suggest planning, but it doesn't tell us exactly what was happening in her mind at the time. The jury has to decide what those actions meant inside her mental state.
The case. But it is really interesting because you mentioned like premeditation versus psychosis. I think that's going to be the crux of the argument. The state is arguing, or in this case, the Commonwealth is arguing that the time that Lindsay Clancy sent her husband away to pick up takeout food was, the perfect enough distance away, that she had made that choice and premeditated that so that he'd be gone long enough for her to do the crime that she had planned in her own head. Her team is going to say, no, that was just a place they got takeout all the time, and she kind of snapped, for lack of a better term, once he left.
This may be the Commonwealth's cleanest argument because it turns a normal errand into a possible window of opportunity to commit a crime. But the same act can carry different meanings. Looking up a restaurant may be a part of a plan, but it could also be an ordinary detail, before a sudden break. The timestamp alone cannot tell us which. That is why the medical records, the expert testimony, the journal entries, and her behavior before and after the killings matter way more than a Google search. I understand why people hear premeditation and, feel like the case is over. I do not think it is that simple.
Tide shows you that Lindsay Clancy did this on purpose, or that it took time, or that, if you're in a state of psychosis, this wouldn't have been possible. The defense will try and say, my client doesn't even remember what happened. She was, not in her own mind at the time when this was going on. And that's going to be really where the jury has to think about this.
I am not going to replay every graphic detail, because the children don't need to be turned into a spectacle for us to understand the horror. And I want to be careful with one assumption, and that is a person with psychosis has to look chaotic in every second. Postpartum psychosis can involve hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, and a break from reality. It is a psychiatric emergency, but the symptoms do not look identical in every patient. And most people experiencing mental health issues do not become violent. This evidence may convince a jury one way or the other. But I don't think any of us can diagnose someone's mental health from a couple of news clips and, a few court filings.
Bring it the day of the murders.
Yeah, unfortunately I was. And as a reporter, this was probably top 3 worst crime scenes I've ever been to. I've been a reporter for a decade, so I've been to a lot of crime scenes. And I distinctly remember this one because it was nighttime and the police officers were crying. So that always stuck out to me because I was sent there as kind of like a break. When I got there, the officers who were coming out of the house who were investigating were crying. So we knew, we being the media, we knew that something really serious had happened inside that house because it was obviously affecting law enforcement. And it was just like the most somber, heartbreaking, otherworldly, unbelievable crime scene I've ever.
This is where I want everyone to stop and just remember who is at the center. Cora was 5, Dawson was 3, Callan 8 months old. They were not evidence props. They were children with personality, routines, and a father who came home to the unimaginable. When I say Lindsay may also be a victim, I am not placing her suffering above theirs. I am saying that more than one person can be destroyed by the same untreated crisis. The children lost their lives. Patrick lost his family as he knew it. Lindsay survived, paralyzed, to face what happened.
For nuance, there isn't a lot of room in the law for the nuance of a situation like this. And so that's part of what makes it such an interesting trial that's coming up. Is, the humanity, the human side of kind of what happened here doesn't fit neatly into these legal boxes. That Lindsay Clancy gets wheeled into that courtroom in a wheelchair.
Literally, yeah.
And that is a direct result of her attempt to take her own life by jumping out of a window the night that all of this happened. She ended up paralyzed as a result. So
her being alive matters to me. And not because survival cancels accountability. No, it doesn't. It matters because she's still a human being who can receive treatment, who can stabilize, and who can understand her actions, understand what happened, and spend the rest of her life reckoning with it. And a verdict of not criminally responsible would not simply send her home. Under Massachusetts law, a court can commit a person to a mental health facility and continue that commitment while the person remains mentally ill and dangerous. Treatment is not the same thing as pretending nothing happened. As I record this on August 3rd, 2026, the trial is underway. Patrick Clancy has testified. The jury has heard the 911 call and visited the home. The case is now moving from public assumptions into evidence, medical testimony, and the legal standard the jury must apply. The original video said the trial was set for July 20. Opening statements began July 27. So this card needs to stay dated because the testimony is still developing. Someone who struggled with mental health, one statement, immediately caught my eye. And it's when she said, "I want help. I want to be well." That statement does not prove that Lindsay lacked, criminal responsibility on January 25th. It does show that she was trying to name a crisis that she couldn't fix by herself. This is what I mean when I say she was invincible. She was visible as a nurse, a wife, a patient, and a list of prescriptions. But the full severity of the danger may have never been held in one place long enough for someone to just stop it. The civil suit alleges failures in her treatment. That claim has yet to be proven. The criminal trial will determine her legal responsibility. The timeline already shows the danger of treating each appointment, each good day, each prescription as separate from the whole picture. My position is not complicated. Cora, Dawson, and Callan deserve to be protected. Patrick deserved to come home to his family. Lindsay deserved effective treatment before her crisis became a catastrophe. I am on Lindsay's side when it comes to her right to be seen as a sick individual capable of treatment, not stripped of her humanity because of what happened. I am also on the side of the children because compassion is not a limited resource. Lindsay is alive. She has the chance to become stable, and live with the truth of what happened. Whether the jury finds her criminally responsible is a legal decision. Whether we discuss her with humanity is our decision. Tell me in the comments respectfully, can this case hold accountability and compassion at the same time?